The Galactic Dominion had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had conquered 1,000 worlds and crushed every species that stood against them. Their warships were so large that they blocked out suns. Their armies numbered in the trillions. Every civilization they found had two choices: kneel or die. Most chose to kneel. The rest became dust and memory. So when their long-range sensors detected a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, they expected nothing special. Just another world to add to their collection. Just another species to break. High Commander Vorik sat on his throne aboard the flagship Eternal Conquest. He was a massive creature, standing 12 feet tall with gray armored skin and 6 eyes that glowed like dying stars. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 300 worlds. He had never known defeat. He had never even known challenge. "Send the envoy fleet," he ordered. "Deliver the standard ultimatum. Give them 1 cycle." To respond, the envoy fleet jumped through hyperspace and emerged near Earth's moon. 12 massive warships, each one capable of burning a continent to glass. They positioned themselves in perfect formation and began their transmission. On Earth, in a military base hidden beneath the mountains of Korea, Lieutenant Yuna was the first to see them. She was 28 years old, with sharp eyes and a calm voice that never wavered. Even now, she studied the readings on her screen and then looked up at her commanding officer. "Sir," she said, "we have contact. 12 vessels. Unknown design. They're big." Captain Junho walked over to her station. He was a man in his early 40s with gray at his temples and a reputation for staying calm when others panicked. He had served in 3 conflicts and had learned that panic helped no one. He looked at the readings and raised an eyebrow. "How big?" he asked. "Each one is approximately 6 kilometers long." Junho whistled softly. "That is big. Are they hostile?" "They're broadcasting. On all frequencies." "Should I put it through?" Junho nodded. "Let's hear what our guests have to say." The main screen flickered to life. A creature appeared, tall and insect-like, with a hard shell of dark green and compound eyes that reflected the light like broken glass. It wore ornate armor decorated with symbols of conquered worlds. Behind it, holographic images showed planet after planet burning, species after species bowing in submission. "Creatures of this world." The alien spoke. Its voice was deep and carried the weight of absolute confidence. "I am Krell, voice of the Dominion, herald of the Eternal Conquest. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Dominion has ruled this galaxy. Every world we touch becomes ours. Every species we meet serves us, or ceases to exist." The holographic display showed more images, massive armies marching across alien landscapes, cities crumbling under orbital bombardment, strange beings weeping as they knelt before Dominion soldiers. "You have been found," Krell continued. "You have been measured. You have been judged worthy of serving the Dominion. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is your fate. You will submit your world, your resources, your population to our rule. You will worship the Dominion as your masters. You will—" A sound interrupted the transmission. It was quiet at first. Just a small noise from somewhere off-screen. Then it grew louder. It spread. Within moments, it filled the entire command center. Laughter. Lieutenant Yuna had her hand over her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. Captain Junho was leaning against a console, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. The technicians, the officers, the guards, everyone in the room was laughing. On the screen, Krell stopped speaking. His compound eyes twitched in confusion. In 10,000 years of delivering this ultimatum, no species had ever laughed. They screamed, they begged, they wept. Sometimes they tried to fight, but they never laughed. "You dare," Krell began. Junho held up a hand, trying to catch his breath. Wait, hold on." He wiped his eyes and looked at the screen. "I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understand. You want us to worship you? You, with the fancy armor and the slideshow of burning planets?" "The Dominion has never been defeated," Krell shouted. "We have destroyed civilizations older than your entire species." "We have big bugs with laser guns," Yuna said, still giggling. "Sir, they're big bugs with laser guns. and they want us to bow. Junho shook his head, smiling. Look, friend. Krell, was it? I appreciate the presentation. Very dramatic. The burning planets were a nice touch, but I have to be honest with you. He leaned closer to the screen. We've seen scarier things in our movies. Krell's mandibles clicked in fury. You do not comprehend the power of the Dominion. We could destroy your world in hours. We could you? Junho interrupted. I mean, sure, maybe you could. But here's the thing. He gestured around the room. Look at us. We're not scared. And if we're not scared of you, what does that tell you about us? For the first time in his long life, Krell felt something strange. It was small, like a tiny cold spot in his chest. He did not recognize it because he had never felt it before. It was doubt. You are insane, Krell said finally. Your species is clearly defective. Junho shrugged. Maybe. Probably. But we're also still here. We've survived everything our own planet threw at us. Ice ages, plagues, wars, something called social media. If you think a few big ships are going to scare us, you really don't know what you're dealing with. Krell ended the transmission without another word. He needed to report this to High Commander Vorik. He needed to explain that the humans were not responding correctly, that something was very, very wrong with this species. Back in the command center, the laughter slowly died down. Yuna looked at Junho with a mixture of amusement and concern. Sir, what do we do now? Junho thought for a moment. Then he smiled. We call the ambassador. We prepare our response, and we show these bugs what humans are made of. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Also, someone should probably tell the president that we just laughed at an alien invasion fleet. I'm sure that conversation will be interesting. Outside, the 12 massive warships hung in the darkness of space, waiting for an answer. They had expected fear. They had expected submission. They had expected the same story that had played out 1,000 times before. They had not expected laughter. And that, perhaps, was their first mistake. Krell stood before High Commander Vorik and delivered his report. He explained everything. The transmission, the ultimatum, the laughter. When he finished, silence filled the throne room of the Eternal Conquest. Vorik's 6 eyes narrowed. They laughed. Yes, High Commander. At the ultimatum. Yes, High Commander. The same ultimatum that has broken 1,000 worlds. Krell lowered his head. They appear to be defective, High Commander. Perhaps a flaw in their evolution. They do not respond to threats as normal species do. Vorik rose from his throne. He was massive, even among his own kind. His gray, armored skin had been scarred by centuries of war. He had personally killed beings from 100 different worlds. He had never met a species he could not break. Then we will show them in person, he decided. Prepare a delegation. Our finest warriors. Our most impressive weapons. We will land on their world and demonstrate our power directly. When they see our strength with their own eyes, they will understand. The delegation arrived on Earth 3 days later. A single transport ship descended through the clouds and landed in a field outside Seoul. The humans had cleared the area and set up a greeting station. News cameras broadcast the moment across the planet. The transport's doors opened. Out marched the Dominion's elite warriors. Each one stood 8 feet tall with armored exoskeletons that could stop plasma fire. Their claws dripped with venom that could kill in seconds. Their eyes were cold and empty. The eyes of creatures who had killed more beings than they could count. Behind them came Krell. And behind him, attendants carrying cases of advanced weapons. Waiting for them was Ambassador Mina. She was 63 years old, small and thin, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple gray suit and carried no weapons. She smiled warmly as the massive warriors approached. Welcome to Earth, she said. I hope your journey was comfortable. Would you like some tea? Krell stopped walking. The warriors behind him hesitated. They had expected armed guards, battle vehicles, some show of force. Not a small old woman offering beverages. We did not come for tea, Krell said. We came to demonstrate the power of the Dominion. Mina nodded pleasantly. Of course. But you must be tired. Please, come inside. We've prepared refreshments. She turned and walked toward the greeting station. After a long moment of confusion, Krell followed. What else could he do? Inside, the delegation found a large room with comfortable chairs, tables covered with food and drinks, and several humans waiting to greet them. One of them was a young man named Taeho, who served as Mina's aide. He was 25, nervous but trying not to show it, and carrying a tablet with notes on alien diplomacy that he had written himself since no such guide existed before today. Please, sit, Mina said. I'm sure your dietary needs are different from ours, but we've tried to prepare a variety. Krell remained standing. You do not seem to understand. We are here to show you what happens to worlds that defy the Dominion. We are here to break your confidence. I understand completely, Mina said, still smiling. And I'm sure you've prepared a wonderful presentation. But first, let me ask you something. She picked up a small dish from the table. Have you ever tried kimchi? Taeho stepped forward with another dish. It's a traditional Korean food, fermented vegetables, very healthy, good for digestion. The elite warriors looked at each other. They had destroyed civilizations. They had burned worlds. And now they were being offered pickled cabbage. Krell decided to proceed with the demonstration. He ordered his attendants to open the weapon cases. Inside were plasma cannons, disintegration rifles, molecular destabilizers, weapons that could level cities and crack continents. Observe, Krell said. This is a Type 7 plasma cannon. It can burn through starship armor in seconds. It can reduce a building to ash in moments. This is what awaits your world if you continue to resist. Taeho leaned closer to look at the weapon. Interesting. What's the power source? Krell blinked. What? The power source? Is it fusion-based? Antimatter? How many shots can you get before it needs recharging? One of the elite warriors growled, a sound like grinding metal. You should be afraid, human. Not curious. Taeho shrugged. I'm an engineer. I like to know how things work. Mina sipped her tea calmly. You'll have to forgive him. Young people these days, always taking things apart to see what's inside. Krell felt that strange cold feeling again. The doubt. It was growing larger. Perhaps you do not understand our history, he said. The Dominion has ruled for 10,000 years. We have conquered every species we have encountered. We have, yes, we watched your presentation, Mina interrupted gently. Very impressive slideshow, lots of fire and screaming. But you see, we have some history too. She set down her tea and looked directly at Krell. Humans have existed for a very short time compared to your Dominion. But in that time, we have done remarkable things. We survived ice ages that covered our planet. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived wars that we fought against ourselves, wars so terrible that they make your conquests look gentle. She stood up, still small, still old. But somehow the room felt different. We invented weapons that could destroy our own world, not once, but many times over. We looked at those weapons and said, this is not enough. We built more. We built weapons that could poison the very air and water. We built weapons that could burn cities in an instant. And then we kept living, right next to those weapons. Every single day, the elite warriors shifted uncomfortably. They did not understand. Species were supposed to evolve toward peace, toward civilization. What kind of species built world-ending weapons and then just continued? Mina smiled again. But now there was something sharp in that smile. You've conquered 1,000 worlds. That's wonderful. But you've never met anyone like us. You've never met a species that scares itself for fun. You've never met a species that turns tragedy into jokes and horror into entertainment. You've never met a species that looks at the end of the world and says, let's see what happens. She sat back down and picked up her tea again. So please, enjoy your demonstration. Show us your weapons. Tell us about your mighty empire. But understand this. We've been preparing for the end of everything since before you found us. A few tall soldiers with fancy guns? That's not scary. That's just Tuesday. Krell stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to his warriors. We return to the ship, he said quietly. I must speak with High Commander Vorik again. As the delegation left, Taeho looked at Mina with wide eyes. Ambassador? Was that wise? We don't actually have weapons that can fight them. Not really, Mina winked at him. They don't know that. And by the time they figure it out, we'll have built some. She picked up a piece of kimchi and ate it thoughtfully. That's the human way, Teho. Fake it until you make it. And never, ever let them see you sweat. Outside, the Dominion transport lifted off into the sky. Inside, Krell stared at his warriors, beings who had conquered worlds without fear, and saw something new in their eyes. Uncertainty. The humans had done something no species had ever done. They had taken the Dominion's finest and made them doubt, and Krell was beginning to suspect that this was only the beginning. High Commander Vorik listened to Krell's second report with growing frustration. The humans had not submitted. They had not trembled. They had offered his warriors kimchi and asked about power sources. This was unacceptable. They need to see real power, Vorik decided. Not presentations, not displays. They need to witness what we do to those who resist. He ordered his fleet to prepare for a subjugation mission. A colony world called Veth Prime had recently attempted rebellion. They would crush this rebellion, while human observers watched. The humans would see the full might of the Dominion. They would understand that resistance meant death. Captain Junho received the invitation 2 days later. The Dominion wanted him to observe a demonstration of peacekeeping operations. He knew what that meant. They wanted to show him conquest and expect him to break. He brought Sergeant Hana with him. She was 34 years old, built like a fighter, with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had served in several conflicts and had earned her reputation through competence and courage. If Junho was calm, Hana was observant. Together, they made a good team. The Dominion transported them across the galaxy to Veth Prime. The planet was green and blue, not unlike Earth. It had cities and farms and oceans. It had people, the Vethians, a species of gentle beings with soft fur and large eyes, who had lived peacefully until the Dominion found them. The Vethians had served the Dominion for 300 years. Recently, some of them had tried to fight back. Now they would be punished. Junho and Hana were placed on an observation deck aboard one of the warships. Below them, the planet waited. Around them, the Dominion fleet moved into position. Krell stood nearby, watching the humans carefully. Today you will see what happens to those who defy us, Krell said. Today you will understand. The assault began. Dominion dropships fell from the sky like burning rain. They landed around the rebel cities and opened their doors. Out poured thousands of soldiers, the same elite warriors the humans had met on Earth, but now in full combat mode. They moved with terrible efficiency, surrounding the cities, cutting off escape routes. The Vethian rebels fought back. They had old weapons, stolen equipment, desperate courage. They fired at the advancing soldiers and managed to bring down a few. But it was not enough. It was never enough. Hana watched through her binoculars as the Dominion forces advanced. She did not show fear. She did not show horror. She showed focus. Their formation is too wide, she said. Junho looked at her. What? The attack formation. They're spreading too thin on the left flank. See there? If the rebels had any heavy weapons, they could punch through and cause serious damage. Krell's antennae twitched. You are analyzing our tactics? Junho shrugged. Habit. We're military. It's what we do. On the surface, the battle continued. Dominion soldiers broke through the rebel defenses and entered the cities. Buildings burned. Vethians ran screaming through the streets. The observation deck received live feeds from soldier cameras, showing the destruction in vivid detail. Hana continued taking notes. She pointed at the screen. They're moving in straight lines through the urban area. That's predictable. Ambush points everywhere. If the rebels had proper training, they could make this much more costly. Krell stepped closer. You speak as if you have experience in such matters. We do, Junho said calmly. Humans have fought in cities for centuries. We've learned a lot about urban combat. Your soldiers are powerful, but their tactics are outdated. They rely on overwhelming force instead of strategy. Overwhelming force has never failed us. Junho smiled slightly. It's never failed you because no one has ever really tested you. You've been conquering for 10,000 years with the same methods. You've gotten comfortable. On the screen, The last rebel stronghold fell. Dominion soldiers raised their flag over the ruins. The Vethian survivors were rounded up, forced to their knees, made to submit. It was over in hours. Krell expected the humans to finally show fear. To finally understand. Hana put down her notes and shook her head. We did this better at Busan, she said. With worse equipment. Junho nodded. Much worse equipment. And against an enemy that actually knew how to fight. Krell's compound eyes widened. You are not afraid? You watched an entire world fall and you criticize our methods? Fear doesn't help anyone, Junho said. Understanding does. And what I understand is that your military hasn't evolved in a very long time. You found a formula that works against frightened populations and you've never needed to change it. He looked at Krell directly. But what happens when you meet someone who isn't frightened? The observation deck fell silent. Below, on Veth Prime, the fires continued to burn. The Vethian survivors wept and surrendered. But something else was happening too. Word was spreading. Among the conquered peoples of the Dominion, a story was being told. A story about a small blue world that laughed at the ultimatum. A story about creatures who watched conquest and found it lacking. A story about beings who looked at the mighty Dominion and said, "Is that all?" On a dozen worlds, in 100 secret meeting places, the oppressed began to whisper. They had lived in fear for generations. They had accepted that resistance was impossible. But now they heard about the humans. Now they heard about laughter instead of terror. Now they wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Junho and Hana returned to their ship for the journey back to Earth. As they walked through the corridors, they passed by other species servants and slaves of the Dominion. These beings looked at the humans with strange expressions. Not fear, not confusion. Hope. A small creature with scaled skin and trembling hands approached them. It spoke in broken standard. The common language of the Dominion. Is it true? It asked. You laughed at them? You are not afraid? Hana knelt down to meet its eyes. We're afraid of a lot of things, she said honestly. But not of bullies. Never of bullies. The creature's eyes filled with tears. We have waited so long. So long for someone to show us it was possible. Junho put his hand on Hana's shoulder. They both knew they could not start a galactic revolution. Not here. Not now. But they could plant a seed. Keep waiting a little longer, he said to the creature. Things are going to change. They boarded their ship and began the journey home. Behind them, on Veth Prime, the Dominion celebrated another victory. They raised their flags and counted their new slaves and believed that everything was going according to plan. They did not notice the whispers. They did not feel the change in the air. They had been rulers for so long that they had forgotten what the beginning of the end looked like. On the ship, Hana looked at Junho. Do you really think things are going to change? Junho watched the stars streak past the windows. I don't know. But I know one thing. He turned to face her. We have 6 months until their deadline. And humans can do a lot in 6 months. Hana smiled. It was not a gentle smile. Then let's get to work. High Commander Vorik could not sleep. For the first time in centuries, something troubled him. The humans refused to behave like conquered species. They refused to fear. They refused to submit, and his own officers were returning from Earth with doubt in their eyes. He decided to investigate personally. He ordered his intelligence division to gather everything they could about humanity, their history, their culture, their wars, their weapons, everything. The reports arrived in massive data files. Vorik began to read. At first, he was not impressed. Humans were young. Their civilization was barely a few thousand years old. They had only reached space recently. They were technological infants, compared to the Dominion. But then he read about their wars. The first major war he studied killed 10 million beings. That was concerning. Then he found a second war that killed 80 million. He stopped reading and checked the numbers again. 80 million. And they had done this to themselves. Not conquest. Not subjugation. Just humans fighting humans over ideas and territory and pride. He continued reading. He learned about weapons that split atoms and released the energy of stars. He learned that humans had built thousands of these weapons and pointed them at each other. He learned that they had come close to destroying their own world multiple times and had simply decided not to, then kept the weapons anyway. He learned about their concept of mutually assured destruction, the idea that peace could be maintained by threatening to end everything. It was insane. It was genius. It was terrifying. Vorik called Krell to his chambers. They built weapons to destroy their own world, Vorik said. And then they kept building more. Krell nodded slowly. They are unstable, High Commander. A dangerous species. Dangerous. Vorik's 6 eyes narrowed. They are not dangerous. They are something else entirely. They are unpredictable. He pulled up more files. Look at this. Their entertainment. They create stories about the end of their world. They watch these stories for pleasure. They deliberately frighten themselves for amusement. Krell looked at the files. Horror films, disaster movies, stories about plagues and invasions and apocalypses. The humans consumed this content eagerly, paying money to experience fear. I do not understand, Krell admitted. Why would they do this? Because fear does not control them the way it controls other species, Vorik said slowly. They have lived with fear for so long that it has become familiar. They have taken the worst possibilities and turned them into entertainment. They have domesticated terror itself. He stood and walked to the window of his flagship, looking out at the stars. We have always won through fear. We show our power and our enemies surrender because they cannot imagine surviving against us. But the humans can imagine it. They imagine survival against impossible odds every day. Their stories are full of it. Victory against monsters. Victory against invasion. Victory against extinction. Krell felt cold. Then how do we defeat them? Vorik did not answer. He was beginning to suspect that there might not be an easy answer. On Earth, very different conversations were happening. Sora was a scientist. She was 31 years old, with tired eyes and coffee-stained lab coats, and she had been working without sleep for 3 days. Her laboratory was hidden underground, in a facility that officially did not exist. On her table sat pieces of technology recovered from the Dominion's transport ship equipment that the aliens had not realized was being scanned and analyzed from the moment they landed. Do-hun was her partner. He was an engineer, 35, with clever hands and a mind that could look at any machine and understand how it worked. He had taken apart everything from cars to satellites. Now he was taking apart alien technology. I don't understand, Sora said, staring at her readings. This is old. Do-hun looked up from the power cell he was examining. Old? The underlying technology. The principles are advanced, yes, but the design hasn't changed in centuries. Maybe longer. Look at this circuit architecture. It's elegant, but it's also conservative. No innovation, no experimentation. Just the same patterns repeated over and over. Do-hun set down his tools. They stopped improving. They stopped needing to improve. Why would they? No one has challenged them in 10,000 years. They found solutions that worked and never looked for better ones. Do-hun grinned. It was not a nice grin. That sounds like a them problem. Over the next few weeks, the work intensified. The Dominion had given humanity a 6-month deadline. That was enough time. More than enough. If they worked fast enough. Sora's team cracked the principles behind Dominion energy weapons. Do-hun's team figured out their propulsion systems. Other teams across the world worked on shields, sensors, communications. They shared data. They competed. They pushed each other to work faster. Human manufacturing plants began to change. Factories that had made cars now made something else. Shipyards that had built submarines now built ships, designed for space. Laboratories that had researched medicine now researched weapons. Nobody gave the order. No government declared war. The humans simply looked at the threat and started preparing. It was instinct. It was survival. It was what they had always done. Ambassador Mina visited the laboratory 1 month after first contact. She looked at the prototype weapons and the experimental shields and the ships taking shape in secret hangars. Will it be enough? She asked. Sora shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But it will be more than they expect. How much more? Do-hun answered. They gave us 6 months and assumed we would spend that time begging for mercy. Instead, We're going to spend it building an army." He held up a small device, a compact version of the Dominion's plasma weapon, redesigned and improved. "Their weapons are powerful. Ours will be powerful and adaptable. They've been using the same technology for centuries. We've been improving ours for decades." Mina smiled. "The tortoise and the hare, something like that. Except in this version, the hare wakes up and finds out the tortoise has nuclear weapons." News of human preparations spread through the galaxy in whispers. The conquered peoples of the Dominion heard rumors of strange beings who built weapons as easily as they breathed. They heard stories of factories working day and night, of scientists who never slept, of a species that responded to threats by becoming more threatening. On a planet called Jorvan, a resistance cell that had been dormant for generations began to meet again. On Veth Prime, survivors of the recent crushing started to gather in secret. On a dozen other worlds, the oppressed looked up at the stars and wondered if help might finally be coming. High Commander Vorik felt the change. He could not see it directly, but he sensed it in the reports from his colonies. Small acts of defiance, whispered conversations, a shift in the way conquered species looked at their masters. "The humans have not done anything yet," Krell reported. "They remain on their planet. They have not attacked. They do not need to attack," Vorik said quietly. "Their existence is the attack. The mere fact that they laugh at us is enough. They are showing the galaxy that we can be laughed at." He made a decision. "We will not wait for their deadline. We will assemble the full fleet. Every warship. Every soldier. We will go to Earth and end this now, before their infection spreads further." Krell bowed. "It will be done, High Commander." As Krell left, Vorik returned to his window. The stars looked different now. They had always seemed like possessions to him, points of light that belonged to the Dominion. Now they seemed like battlegrounds. Every one of them held the potential for rebellion, all because of one small world that refused to kneel. "What are you?" Vorik whispered to the distant blue planet. "What kind of species are you?" On Earth, in her underground laboratory. Sora sneezed. "Someone's talking about us," Dohan joked. "Let them talk," Sora replied. "We'll give them something to talk about soon enough." She turned back to her work. There were still 3 months until the deadline. And they had so much more to build. The deadline arrived on a Tuesday morning. High Commander Vorik had not waited for the deadline. He had assembled his fleet early, 500 warships, the largest force the Dominion had gathered in 3,000 years. They emerged from hyperspace near Earth's moon, blocking out the stars with their massive hulls. On Earth, alarms sounded. Satellites tracked the incoming fleet. Military bases went to high alert. Across the planet, billions of humans looked up at the sky and waited. In the command center beneath Korea, Captain Junho stood beside Lieutenant Yuna. They had been here when this started. They would be here when it ended. "How many ships?" Junho asked. 500 confirmed, Yuna replied. Her voice was steady. "Each one bigger than anything we've built." "And how many ships do we have?" Yuna smiled slightly. "Enough." Ambassador Mina stood at the main console, preparing to deliver humanity's response. She had spent weeks working with leaders from every nation, crafting a message that spoke for all of Earth. Now she took a deep breath and opened the channel. High Commander Vorik's face appeared on the screen. His 6 eyes glowed with cold fire. "Your deadline has passed," Vorik said. "You have refused our generous offer. Now you will face the consequences. This is your last chance to surrender. Kneel now, and your world will be spared the worst of our wrath." Mina looked at him calmly. "We've reviewed your offer. We've discussed it extensively. And we have a counter-proposal." Vorik's mandibles clicked with impatience. "There are no counter-proposals. There is only submission or destruction. That's where you're wrong." Mina pressed a button on her console. "Look behind you." Vorik turned. Rising from Earth's atmosphere came a fleet. 100 ships, smaller than the Dominion vessels, but sleek and fast and armed with weapons that gleamed with dangerous light. They were not built to match the Dominion's power. They were built to surprise it. But that was not all. From behind the moon came more ships. Different ships. Ships of designs that Vorik recognized because they belonged to conquered species. Jorvanite cruisers. Vethian carriers. Vessels from a dozen different worlds that had lived under Dominion rule for centuries. They were flying alongside the humans. "What is this?" Vorik demanded. Captain Junho appeared on the screen, standing on the bridge of the flagship Soul's Pride. He was grinning. "You gave us 6 months," Junho said. "What did you expect us to do? Just wait?" Krell's voice came over the communication channel, urgent and alarmed. "Hi, Commander. These weapons, they're different. Our sensors are having trouble analyzing them. They appear to be based on our technology, but modified, improved." Vorik stared at the human fleet. He saw the plasma cannons that had been rebuilt, the shield generators that had been enhanced, the propulsion systems that had been optimized. In 6 months, the humans had taken Dominion technology and made it better. "That's impossible," he said. "Our technology took millennia to develop. Your technology has been the same for millennia." Sora's voice came over the channel. She was aboard one of the science vessels, monitoring the engagement. "Ours changes every decade. Adaptation is what we do." The Dominion fleet held position. They still had the numerical advantage. They could still win through sheer force. But for the first time, there was hesitation. The commanders looked at their screens and saw weapons they did not understand. They saw ships flying alongside species that should have been too broken to resist. High Commander Vorik faced a choice. He could order the attack. He would probably win, but the cost would be immense, and the damage to the Dominion's reputation even greater. To struggle against a species that had been laughing at them to actually fight a real battle instead of a simple conquest would shatter the myth of invincibility that had held the galaxy in check for 10,000 years. Or he could retreat and prove that the humans had been right to laugh. There was no good option. The humans had made sure of that. "You cannot defeat us," Vorik said. But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Even with your improvements, your fleet is smaller. Your experience is nothing compared to ours." "Maybe," Junho replied. "But here's the thing about humans. We're not trying to win. We're trying to survive. And we're really, really good at that." Sergeant Hana's voice joined the channel. "Also, we've been broadcasting this entire confrontation across the galaxy. Every conquered world is watching right now. They're seeing the mighty Dominion hesitate. They're seeing you, unsure." Vorik's eyes widened. He turned to Krell. "Is this true?" Krell checked his readings. His antennae drooped. "The humans have somehow accessed our communication networks. The broadcast is reaching. Everywhere. High Commander, every world in the Dominion is watching. Across the galaxy, the oppressed watched their screens. They saw the human ships standing against the Dominion fleet. They saw the rebel vessels flying free. They saw the greatest power in the galaxy pause, uncertain, and they began to laugh. On Jorvin, a factory worker watching the broadcast started to chuckle. The guards looked at him in confusion. Then another worker laughed. Then another. On Veth Prime, a gathering of survivors watched the confrontation in a hidden basement. When they saw the Dominion hesitate, they laughed until tears ran down their furred faces. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 hidden places, the laughter spread. 10,000 years of fear began to crack. High Commander Vorik heard the laughter. It came through the communication channels from across the galaxy. His own soldiers were receiving reports of uprisings, of riots, of conquered peoples, suddenly finding their courage. He had wanted to destroy the humans before their infection spread. He was too late. The infection was already everywhere. "This is not over," Vorik said to Ambassador Mina. "The Dominion will not fall because of one species' insolence." Mina nodded gracefully. "Perhaps not. But it's not just one species anymore, is it? It's all of them. Every world you ever conquered. Every species you ever broke." She smiled. "We didn't beat you, High Commander. We just reminded everyone that you could be beaten. The rest is up to them." The Dominion fleet remained in position for 3 more hours. Then, one by one, the ships began to withdraw. There was no dramatic retreat, no admission of defeat. They simply left, returned to deal with the uprisings spreading across their empire. Earth had won, not through superior force, but through something more powerful: the destruction of an idea. The idea that the Dominion was invincible. The idea that resistance was futile, the idea that fear was the only option. On the bridge of Soul's Pride, Captain Junho watched the last Dominion ship disappear into hyperspace. Sergeant Hana stood beside him. "What happens now?" she asked. Junho thought about it. "Now we help the others. The Jorvanites, the Vethians, all of them. They've started their own fight. They'll need support. That could take years. Decades, probably." Junho smiled. "But we're not in a hurry. We've got time." Years later, the galaxy had changed. The Dominion still existed, but smaller now, weaker. Many of its former conquests had broken free. A new alliance had formed, the galactic community, built on principles of cooperation instead of domination. The first leader of the galactic community was an elderly human woman named Yuri. She had been a junior diplomat during first contact, watching and learning. Now she stood before representatives from 100 species and opened the first session with a joke. Half the delegates did not understand it. The other half were starting to. In the back of the chamber, an old being watched. Krell had survived the fall of the old order. He had chosen to adapt rather than fight, to learn rather than resist. He still did not fully understand humans. He suspected he never would. But he had learned one thing: the universe was vast and strange and full of terrors. Empires rose and fell. Species lived and died. Suns burned out, and new ones ignited. In the face of all that cosmic indifference, all that infinite darkness, the humans had found a response that no other species had discovered. They laughed, not because they were foolish, not because they did not understand, but because they understood perfectly. They knew how small they were, how fragile, how temporary, and instead of letting that knowledge break them, they turned it into something else: joy, defiance, a refusal to be crushed by the weight of existence. Krell shook his head and made a sound that, after years of practice, had started to resemble a chuckle. The humans had taught him that much, at least. In the end, they had not conquered the galaxy through strength or cleverness or technology. They had simply reminded everyone that the darkness was not as powerful as it pretended to be. That fear was a choice. That laughter was the most revolutionary act in the universe. And the galaxy, finally, was learning to laugh along.